That's a wrap on Pitt's 2020 regular season as the Pitt Panthers win to close out their 2020 regular season with a 34-20 victory over Georgia Tech on the road. This Thursday night game ends up closing out an up and down season for the Pitt Panthers, but one that is now officially in the books as they wait for whatever bowl game they potentially play in. Here is another edition and the final regular season edition of the Pitt edition of Pittsburgh Postgame here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm your host, as always, Mike Asti, and I'm going to be joined alongside by the man who threw up all that postgame coverage over there on Pittsburgh Sports Now, PSN's Alan Saunders. Alan, Pitt gets the win. They win it at the end of the day convincingly, despite starting out trailing and then having to eventually pick things up. One thing that clearly jumps off the page, and it's something that Mike and I talked about on post-game shows way back, and I know he always wanted to have eventually figured out. And it's funny enough, they established the running game here as they end the season as Vincent Davis goes off with 200-plus yards. Pitt ends up with a victory. It's to a bad team, and it doesn't make up for the four-game losses earlier in the year when they lost four in a row and kind of puttered away the year. But what do you make of this game? What do you make of Davis's emergence in this game? And then I guess totality to the season as the regular season closes out.
Yeah, I think the running game is actually really interesting in that I really think the way that Vincent Davis played in this game probably changes the way you feel about that position going forward.
Okay.
Maybe that's the only thing that maybe could have happened in this game. I know Pitt's defense is still going to be good next year. I have a pretty good idea without Kenny Pickett, Pitt's quarterbacks are going to struggle a little bit next year. I have a pretty good idea Pitt's wide receivers are talented, but have some issues securing the ball sometimes, and that's probably going to be the case next year. If Pitt can run the ball, and, I think we always knew Vincent Davis had some talent, but he hadn't shown it on the field at any point this season. Showing it here, I think, changes the way you should feel about this offense going into 2021. And that's probably the most impactful thing that happened on the field today. Yes, winning a sixth game means they'll finish with at least a 500 record, if not a winning record. Always nice to win the last one and kind of go out on a high note. But let's be honest, like their goals for the season were lost a long time ago. This one wasn't going to bring them back. But I think the way they won actually does provide a decent amount of optimism going forward for that running game and the offensive line that help provide it.
Pitt now finishes the season 6-5, so they do get above 500. But as you mentioned, 5 losses, 4 of them in a row to 2 mediocre teams mixed in there, but close games. I mean, this season was a few points away from just having losses to the Miami, Notre Dame, and Clemson, who ended up boat racing them. Those were clear losses for Pitt, but I think going into the season, Pitt fans would have been okay if those were the only 3 losses in the year. Those are not. 6-5 is the final record. And yeah, the final score in this game being 1, aside from wanting to end the season on a positive note, not that big of a deal because you're not going to get any brownie points from anybody by beating a 3-7 Georgia Tech team. But 247 yards on the ground, man, an average of 9.9. I know he had the 74-yarder mixed in, but this was a Pitt team that struggled running the ball earlier in the year. Yes, it eventually picked up steam, but there wasn't the emergence of the one single back earlier in the year. Many thought, I know Mike was concerned if Vincent could be the guy due to his size. Are you at all surprised that not only did he have a solid day and emerge as that guy eventually, but 247, 25 for 247, 9.9 in a touchdown, he just flat out went off to kind of put an exclamation point on the position to end the year, which is a positive note, if nothing else. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, listen, Vincent Davis is a talented running back. We saw it at times last year. I just think the biggest change was not in Vincent Davis. It was in the offensive line. Pitt was able to get him clean through the line of scrimmage. And that's when he's able to use his speed is elusiveness and this weird combination of lack of size and power that he puts together so nicely, where he's just this tiny little dude, but he still runs people over.
Yeah.
But none of that works when he's forced to be making moves or trying to break tackles or making guys miss in the backfield. He needs that clean hole to get going. And then he can use his momentum and his speed and his agility. And that's what makes him a special running back. He can't be Jerome Bettis, though. He can't break tackles in the backfield and plunge forward for 3 yards when there's no hole there. And the biggest problem with this running game early in the year is that they had far too many plays that were negative plays and 0-yard plays. I felt like today, almost every carry, he got to the line of scrimmage and got 3-4 yards almost every time. That was the biggest difference. And to me, I think it's a credit to those guys in the offensive line for sticking with it. They missed 3 guys for the last 2 games. They changed it up a little bit, went with Macca and Calvis. I really feel like they showed something tonight as well.
Alan Saunders of Pittsburgh Sports Now, Mike Asti here on the Pitt edition of Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. This is the final regular season edition of Pittsburgh Postgame for Pitt football, as Pitt gets a 34-20 victory over Georgia Tech, finishing 6-5 on the year. And again, Vincent Davis ran all over the Yellow Jackets in this game. Now, Alan, from the flip side of Vincent Davis emerging, and regardless of his size, and maybe there's a concern about him doing it for an entire season, but certainly at least leaves you with a positive taste in your mouth for that position after this season closes out with a performance like that. But on the flip side, DJ Turner had a solid game, 5 catches, 82 yards. Nice to see that from him. But Addison, a player earlier in the year, was emerging to be that wide receiver threat. Seemed like he could be the next great wide receiver for Pitt. I know there was the game that he sat out because of COVID. It's certainly been a bumpy ride as of late. Only 3 catches, 14 yards in this game. Thoughts on Addison's season, because it went the opposite direction. Rather than started from the bottom, now you're here with Vincent Davis. It seemingly started from the top, and now you're here with Addison.
Well, I don't think that's particularly surprising. I think he's a player that played so much so early as a freshman. I think you're seeing his sophomore slump at the end of his first season. I think you're seeing defenses start to key on him in a different way that they weren't doing at the beginning of the year, because they know who the heck he was. They're just, number 3, never heard of him, whatever. Throw anybody on that guy.
What's going on?
By the 11th game, they're like, on Sunday in their team meetings, what are we going to do to stop Jordan Addison? How do we keep this guy from killing us? Right. And I think the emergence of DJ Turner then gave Pitt 2 options. And so I think in this game, Pitt was content to say, good, take Jordan Addison away from us. We'll just throw the other guy. He's just as good. And so I think that's why he saw less production. I don't think that changes the way I feel about Jordan Addison as a player going forward. He's still an outstanding possession receiver that looks like he has an NFL future and should probably be Pitt's number 1 receiver next year.
You would figure he's going to be Pitt's number 1 receiver next year for sure, but it just feels different, and maybe the stats certainly could lie because he's doing a lot more and opening up space for other guys like DJ Turner, who has emerged and got better, at least production-wise, as the season progressed, but just went off earlier in the year. Not as much here lately, but also missing that game because of COVID here. Again, Alan Saunders of Pittsburgh Sports Now, Mike Asti here on the Pitt edition, the Pitt football edition, final one of the regular season here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Now, Alan, we mentioned it. I've talked about it on every post-game show here this season since they occurred. Talked about it with Kovacan, talked about it with Paul Zeiss. Kind of got the same takes all the way around, but we're just going to kind of wrap things up with this similar question. What are your thoughts now looking back? Because a lot of it was, we got to wait until the season closes. They got to end on a high note. We'll evaluate it then. Well, the season's now closed out, regular season-wise at least. They have ended on a high note. They have played for Narduzzi. They've kind of quieted those conversations that he's going to be back. They've clearly shown they're at least willing to play well for their coach, and they picked it up here as of late to end the season on a positive note. But Pitt finishes 6-5. That includes 4 consecutive losses. As I said earlier, 2 of those 2 weak teams they certainly should have beat 3 of their 5 losses are at the time to top 15 teams in Miami, Notre Dame, and Clemson. A couple of those boat race Pitt, and nobody would have been mad about those losses, but certainly could be upset about Boston College, about NC State losing close games to teams that seemingly not as good, certainly at that time, and blowing what was at the time a really red hot start to a season. Many thought, Narduzzi thought, because of this defense, certainly there was some national attention, it could have been a special year for Pitt. It ends up being a mediocre year that's going to go to a bowl game, but nothing really to write home about in the midst of 2020. They end it well, but what now are your thoughts in retrospect on this season overall? It certainly ended up not being as bad as it could have been, but certainly feels like it could have been a season that also could have been much better than it was.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot there, right? I mean,
sure.
This is a team that I predicted coming into the season. I was actually just trying to look up my prediction. I think I predicted that they were going to win 7 games or maybe 8.
Right.
Don't quote me on that. But
we'll give you a break on it then.
I think I ended up going with 7.
Okay, so you weren't as high then as some others, because I know that some of our colleagues were going 8-9.
Yeah, I was actually just trying to look that up right now, and so, but I look at that prediction, and then I look at what happened this season, and I think I and a lot of other people underestimated how good NC State and Boston College turned out to be.
Maybe.
But I also feel like I probably overestimated how good Louisville and Virginia Tech were going to be. So, that kind of washes itself out.
Yeah.
To me, I think the big thing is, even if you lose the game against NC State, which they fairly earned that loss at home, they did not play a good game. If they're able to take care of business in overtime against Boston College, and then, losing to Miami and Notre Dame with your backup quarterback,
there's
no shame in that at all.
No, and right? I know many feel that if Pitt had played against Miami, because Miami seemingly has appeared to be overrated, maybe that game could have been different. Pitt played much better in that game than they did in Notre Dame, of course.
Listen, I think, at the end of 11 games, you are what you are. I think Pitt is an upper middle class ACC team this year. But it's a disappointing result, I think, still, because you have those games that Pitt probably should have won. And then if the only what if of the season is, what if Kenny Pickett had been healthy?
Right.
Well, that's part of the game. But when the what ifs are, Kenny Pickett wasn't healthy, and what if the team hadn't blown 2 1-point games to teams that they probably should have beaten?
Sure.
I think it leaves a pretty overall sour taste. It's not a good season. It's not a bad season. Still have a chance to go 7-5, which would be, look, this is not a conference where a lot of teams are consistently good. If you look at that middle class of the conference, right, outside of Clemson, Notre Dame's a 1-year thing.
Right.
Miami, really, outside of those, even Miami hasn't been
Miami had a couple bad years mixed
really
in.
Outside of Clemson, no one in this conference consistently wins significantly better than Pitt has. I think they're 3rd in ACC wins since Pat Narduzzi's been here. I think what Pitt fans are really looking for is, they've gotten consistently competitive. They're consistently in that top 3rd of the conference. They just want one really good year, right? That's what they want. They want to go to the Orange Bowl. They want to win 9 or 10 games, right? Or, they want to have a season that kind of stands out as having accomplished something. And I think the reason that this season is so disappointing for a lot of people is because it feels like this team was capable of that. It feels like this team, healthy Kenny Pickett, takes care of business against NC State and Boston College, knocks off Miami with some Pickett heroics. That team is now going to the Orange Bowl, right? That's what happens.
And probably, especially if you get Notre Dame and Clemson both in the playoff, or something occurs there with Notre Dame in there as a one-off. But this year could have shaken out where it was 3 elite teams in the ACC, 2 of them even go in the playoff, and then you have Pitt going into a pretty decent bowl game. That was, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
And so it's not disappointing to go. I mean, it is, it's not bad to be consistently slightly above average, right? I mean, that's better than Pitt has been. Let's be real. They were consistently average or worse. But I just feel like it's a missed opportunity when you have a senior quarterback, when you have multiple returning All-Americans on defense, to not take advantage of that and really have a special season instead of just an okay to good one. Another one of these, if they win a bowl game, it'll be 7-5 and everyone will say,
Yeah, because also the bowl win you're going to have is not going to be an Orange Bowl. It's not going to be an historic bowl game that everyone's grandfather is aware of. It's going to be a bowl game that it's nothing to write home about as much. But you do.
I don't know about you, Mike, but I look forward to the Gasparilla Bowl every year.
I mean, absolutely. Hey, I I am all about the Cheez-It Bowl and some of those bowls, talking about those on the West Virginia shows. So, yeah, I mean, some of those bowl games are named after my favorite cities, named after my favorite snacks. Some of those are near and dear to my heart just for the names alone, and they keep on moving along. So I'm not going to hate on them. But, yeah, I get what you're saying. This could have been a must special year. It does feel like a missed opportunity for Pitt for two reasons for me. Number one, because it's a veteran team, a veteran quarterback that's really at his peak in terms of college play, the leader of this team. I feel like Kenny Pickett gets criticized maybe too much by Pitt fans. He's not going to be Dan Marino, but he certainly has been good enough for this team to have had a special year, had one of those seasons with him be a special year, certainly now how he's playing, and the defense being such a veteran group. And yes, you want to win even one of those games against Boston College or NC State. You turn one of those games, maybe it wouldn't have been Orange Bowl, but it would have been a better year than this, or at least you would have felt better about the year, even if you still lost to Miami. And I know that Notre Dame's in there as a one-off, but if you somehow don't get a legit bowl because you're just behind Miami, Notre Dame, and Clemson, it wouldn't have been as bitter pill to swallow as this season unfolded. But also, Alan, the defense playing poorly in some of those games that were losses, when this defense entered the season with some national media members saying it was going to be the best, one of the better defenses in the country. I feel like the defense let this team down at times with all their talent, which maybe makes it suck a little bit more. You don't want to lose because of the defense at times, the defense having gaps. I mean, DeMar Hamlin a couple times missing some one-on-ones in the end zone, but just overall, the defense production a couple times didn't play as highly as maybe they could have, or their hype was earlier in the season. That feels like that sucks a little bit more, since that was a veteran bunch with the most talent, and Narduzzi being a defensive guy.
Yeah, really, the only one that kind of jumps out to me there is the Miami game, where they gave up those 2 or 3 big plays on missed assignments in the secondary.
Well, Notre Dame too, unless you
they had a bunch of pass interference penalties, a bunch of penalties in general that really hurt them in that game.
Right. Notre Dame, unless you just throw Notre Dame into the garbage can and figure they were going to lose anyway.
3 interceptions in that game, 2 of them right to the defense, and they all led to short field touchdowns.
Yeah.
So
I mean, field position wise is how Clemson was able to dominate. They played okay early.
Notre Dame did that to a lot of teams this year too.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, again, it's 6-5. You are what your record is. I think also, I could imagine Pitt fans also feel like, as you're saying, when is that special year going to come in terms of when are they going to get lucky breaks? You're 6-5 off of a few different bounces, a few different bad calls, a few different mental mistakes for yourself and bad penalties. And that's how you lose some more games than you should have lost, that you end up with a mediocre season instead of a special one. When is it going to come together and you're going to get those lucky breaks?
They go to the other side, right? Now, instead of thinking that this is going to be a special season, they're going to go into 2021 with who's the quarterback, who are all these new guys on defense, what's going to happen with the offensive coordinator. I don't know. I think that's still up in the air. And so,
well, that's
instead of going into the season with the expectation, now they're going to go into the season with a bunch of question marks about whether they can do it instead of thinking that they could.
Well, that's glass half full, Alan. I'll give it to you in terms of that might be a positive for the Pitt program, for Heather Lyke and company, because they're going to go into next year with everyone thinking this team is not going to be that great. If they end up with a 7-win season next year, people might say, well, that was a great coaching job. You actually did better than I would have thought. And now feeling good about the program moving forward. So not having pressure might be better for this Pitt program now, after they underachieved or did not achieve to what people thought entering a season when they were getting national hype going into this bizarre season. Alan Saunders here, Mike Asti on the Pitt edition to close out the regular season here after Pitt's victory over Georgia Tech here on Pittsburgh Postgame on PSL. Bottom of the video, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It's easy to do so. It's free to do so. Helps us get the content to you. I do want to kind of, as we close things up here, get towards closing things up, I do want to kind of hit on what you just said in terms of what are your thoughts for Pitt next year. We'll get to the bowl game and your thoughts there in a moment, but what are your thoughts now going into next season? Obviously, Pickett, tons of question marks. People could come back with the COVID rules, but a lot of that's up in the air. This is a team that went 6-5. Many thought would do better, but they did not. Now going into next year where the fans kind of are disappointed, certainly angry. That seems to calm down a little bit here as they've turned it on at the end of the season. But what do you expect from next year, and what are your thoughts about the program headed into next year, the state of Pitt for Alan Saunders right now?
I think the state of Pitt is continually getting very, very, very slightly better. And it's probably frustrating for a lot of the fans.
Right.
This season was not what it could have been, but that doesn't mean it was bad either.
Right.
You know, they're 6-5 with 3 losses to top 10 teams.
That's hard for fans to understand, though, because they're just the casual fans going to see NC State, Boston College. I'm mad.
Yeah, but they beat Louisville and Virginia Tech. I mean,
right.
You know, are those teams that Pitt should like count as wins at the beginning of the year? I don't think so. I mean, those are good programs. Right. And so,
sure,
you know, I just think the recruiting is continuing to get better. I feel like as time has gone on, the coaching staff, the changes that made to the coaching staff over the years have continued to get better. Even though I feel like Mark Whipple underperformed as an offensive coordinator, I think this is the best staff Pitt has had under Pat Narduzzi right now.
Do you think he's back? Because that's been a question a lot on the post-game shows. Vukovican's been very public with his thoughts, obviously.
I don't know, because I don't know the contract details, and in a pandemic year where the money could matter. Let me put it to you this way. If the money is no issue, I think no. I think if there's no worry about eating some years of contract and that kind of thing, I think no.
Is it just because Narduzzi's clearly not going to be gone and there has to be some scapegoat? Why not go to the assistant that not many fans like anyway? And he did have a rough year, certainly.
I don't know if it's scapegoating as much as just the offense was not very good. I mean, if you look at the points per game and the yardage, it was a bad offense. And it was a bad offense last year too. And so.
And you figure more weapons here this year.
I don't feel
DJ Turner
that
wasn't there last
his
year.
offense played well enough over these last 2 years for Mark Whipple to deserve a third year. I will say that. Will it happen? I don't know. You know, there's all kinds of factors that go into that decision other than whether they've earned it. But no, I don't feel that he did. And I think if you look at what Pitt did 2 years ago when they had Sean Watson in a slightly better position, if you look at the numbers, Watson's offenses did a little bit better than Whipple's did, and he was still let go after 2 years. I think this staff is really close to being really, really good. And I feel like they're only a couple pieces away. And I think the offensive coordinator is one of them.
Yeah, I think that's a move that's going to be made as well. And you have a veteran quarterback who did miss some time, though. You have more weapons this year, DJ Turner being there this year to kind of diversify the receiver core. You didn't have a running game early. You finally get one late, but some question that even being a play calling situation earlier on in the year. So I do think whether it's scapegoat or not, he's going to eventually be the guy to go. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of, yes, you did get some wins. Maybe you wouldn't always guarantee. The devil's advocate stance is if you get those wins and if you can beat those teams, then you wish you could have beat the teams that you didn't think were that good. Granted, when they played those teams, they weren't that great, and Pitt was off to that 3-0 start. But we later learned, as you said earlier, Boston College and NC State were better than people thought they were, and probably is just all similar average teams that could beat each other in any given Saturday or Thursday, and Pitt ended up not being lucky, didn't get the lucky breaks. I'm sure Pitt fans want to eventually get those. This year was not a special year by any means. It's an odd year. 2020, Notre Dame's in the ACC, for crying out loud. I don't know if anybody would have thought Notre Dame would ever play an ACC full-time football season if you would have asked us years ago, and it took a global pandemic to get them in there, as maybe they're now win the conference. So it wasn't a bad year, though, and there is reason for optimism around the Pitt program. it could have completely been a year where the wheels totally fell off with how they were in the middle of the year with those 4 straight losses after the hot start. Alan Saunders, Mike Asti here as we close up shop here on the Pitt edition, the Pitt football edition, the final one of the regular season. We will have something after the bowl game, which I imagine will occur here. And I do want to ask you, Alan, thoughts on what bowl game you feel Pitt will be invited to? I'm imagining you feel Pitt will get invited. Obviously, the COVID rules of wins are not as big of a deal this year, but Pitt has the 6 anyway. So which bowl game do you think Pitt might play in? And is it a big deal for you? Because we talked about the state of the Pitt program ending on a high note, the wins not mattering as much as establishing these individual positions and now the running game, et cetera, with still question marks for next year. But you want fans to have a good taste in their mouth. It's not the Orange Bowl. It's not going to be a trophy that fans are going to care about in 20 years necessarily. But is it a big deal also for you to win the bowl game, no matter what it is, or is just maybe playing well good enough? Because having those extra weeks of practices, which I've talked about as well in the WVU postgame show, that's a major selling point for a program to play those bowl games, even though some may say outside of the New Year's Six and those legit historical bowl games, why do you need the Cheez-It Bowl? Why do you need the Liberty Bowl? Why do you need the New Orleans Bowl and the Tampa Bowl and the Hawaii Bowl? Well, it's nice to have practice for those programs leading into a game.
We need those bowls because people need things to gamble on, Mike.
You need money. You need things to gamble on. We need things to watch if we're going to go back into quarantine, for crying out loud. We need something on TV, whether you're there in the stadium or not. But what bowl game do you think Pitt's going to be in, and do they need to win it for you?
Well, I think there are 3 pretty strong contenders, and those are the Military Bowl, the Gasparilla. The Military Bowl would be in Annapolis, Maryland, at Navy against Navy. The Gasparilla Bowl in Tampa, where the Buccaneers play at Raymond James Stadium, and it would be against a team likely from the AAC or maybe from Conference USA, or the Boca Raton Bowl, which is played on FAU's campus and would
shocker in Boca Raton.
and
very, very nice there.
UCF. So it's either Navy, unknown high-level group of 5 team, or UCF. So to me, if somehow like the chips fall weirdly and Pitt ends up in a major bowl and they're like playing somebody from the Big Ten or the SEC, then I don't feel like the bowl is some kind of must win. I mean, you just kind of you kind of take what you get. If they're playing a group of 5 team, then I think the bowl becomes a must win. And
even against UCF, because I know they didn't have the year they had a couple years ago, but they actually are still a pretty good team that's not getting discussed at all. Certainly offensively, that could be a lot for Pitt's defense to handle.
Even against UCF, in what would essentially be a true road game, Boca's only, I don't know, like an hour and 15 minutes from Orlando, something like that.
Sure.
And I assume they're gonna have fans because Florida.
Why not? Yeah. It'll be a Florida.
But
talk about it on local way.
Yeah, I think that's still a must-win game. If you want to come out of this season feeling good about yourself, you can't end it losing to a group of 5 team, even UCF. So yeah, I feel like the bowl is a must-win if they play one of those 3 games, and that's what I expect to happen. Everybody hates playing against the triple option, but I love Annapolis, and so I got my fingers crossed for Navy.
Okay, you might be the only one. I mean, Annapolis is not bad. There's some solid bed and breakfasts there.
Annapolis is one of my very favorite towns in the entire country. I love going there.
Okay.
And just in general, I'm not sure. There are some teams where like the bowl game is really important because they're just like for example, if this Georgia Tech team gets a way to get into a bowl game, that'd be huge for them because. They've got
3-7. It wouldn't happen any other time.
They're just a mess, though, right? They need to look at guys at every position. I can probably write you the depth chart for week 1, 2021 right now. I got a pretty good idea. There's not a whole lot of, Pitt doesn't need a bowl game. Let me say that. They might want one, and if they do, great. I don't know. To me, I think the deal with playing the Boca Bowl is on the 22nd. To me, from a player's perspective, that's the one I'd want because then you get to go home for Christmas. The other 2 are after Christmas. Gasparilla Bowl's on the 26th, Military Bowl's on the 28th. So that would be less than fun for the players.
At least it's not a weird New Year's Day illegitimate bowl that sometimes occurs.
Oh, yeah. for
Yeah.
like January 6th.
Well, there was the Heart of Dallas Bowl that played on New Year's Day, and actually their official Twitter account got very, very mad at me one year because I said that any bowl game outside of the formerly BCS should never play after New Year's Day, and they actually tweeted me back and was like, "Mike, we give to charity. Why can't we have the day?" I'm like, all right, well, touche. Yeah.
Mike hates charity. Heard it here first.
Yeah. No, then you bring up a point about the players and getting it done before Christmas. You also have to think of the perspective because this is what we talked about too on past shows. How much fun will it be for these players? I mean, a lot of the time you want that vacation to end a year. Certainly for the veterans, you get to go to Boca. That's pretty cool down there and be treated like kings and be able to go to every nightclub and get in there for free and everyone's after you. That's not going to work right now. I mean, you swipe right in a dating app down there, you could be shutting the bowl game down and be an international story in what CNN's covering. So
at least it's warm. That's all I got to say.
Sure.
Like at least
like going to Annapolis, so you want to be in. Can't imagine any fun that's happening for these players in Annapolis. They're going to be in their bed and breakfast, oddly,
it's
or
going to be
a
the same
weird.
no matter where they go. It's just going to be like a bowl game. There's not going to be any of the. Just going to be like a road game.
You can't leave.
Fun stuff that happens.
You call Uber Eats and you make the wrong turn. You're risking your career. I mean, it's just a fiasco right now.
Pretty
so
sure
it's not going to be as
players
fun.
that went to the Sun Bowl, not the last time they were there, but 2 times ago, ended up in Mexico.
Okay. See, none of that's going to be happening. And if you go to Mexico, that's really going to be an international problem if somehow you bring COVID over the border. And at least it won't be the Sun Bowl for Pitt. I do think winning it would certainly be nice for the program. I think certainly playing well and impressing depending on who you're playing. But yeah, and that also is the risk if you play a group of 5 team, even if it's UCF, that you're thought to be a program that should be beating them. So if you lose, that's going to be a stain on you, even though it is UCF. And certainly if it's anybody else out of the group of 5. And if you win, you're not going to be able to write too much home about it because they're going to say that you should. So that's kind of the risk of those games. Certainly when you play a group of 5 teams in major bowl games, this not being the case for Pitt, but certainly being in a bowl game, winning it would be all good, even though the fun's not going to be there this year and they're going to play those games. And maybe Alan Saunders will get himself to Tampa twice in this season of covering football, if that's where Pitt heads for their bowl game. And then Alan and I get to go down to Tampa in early February for something else that we won't jinx ourselves on, that I will hope will be more fun. Granted, it could also be Alan and I playing Monopoly, doing 17 Pittsburgh Sports live programs since we're not allowed out of anywhere. I mean, it might not be fun either. But I'm still
let's not even make plans for that.
Yeah, it's not gonna be fun either, but I'm gonna be there if that's possible, and who the hell knows based on last week. But nonetheless, Pitt does get a victory to end their regular season. So we'll now see about their postseason, which they want to have, and they will be having. Pitt beating Georgia Tech 34-20. Pitt now finishes their regular season on a high note, 6-5, another victory for the Pitt Panthers. So maybe a year that you felt should have been better, maybe a year that should have been a special season that they kind of missed the mark on, but a year that certainly could have been much worse as well. Reason for optimism. Narduzzi's not hearing that he should be fired every day on Twitter like he would have been weeks ago. This program kind of knows where it's headed and who's going to be there for the most part entering next season. That maybe wasn't the case a few weeks ago. It's been able to be good enough to calm Heather Lyke down. So that's a positive as well. And again, Pitt wins 34-20, now 6-5 on the year. For Alan Saunders, for all of us throughout the Now family of networks, head over there to Pittsburgh Sports Now to catch all the post-game coverage, as well as any coverage throughout the week over there at PSN. Also remember to follow them on Twitter at PGH Sports Now. Follow us at PGH Sports Live. And of course, bottom of the video, click that subscribe button. If you don't want to follow us on Twitter or anywhere else, just click the button. It makes it easy for us to get the content to you. You get a notification whenever we go live or release any video, even if it's a video that ends up previewing a game that never actually will get played. So that's something that's still right up there on the channel that I did today. Slap myself in the face. Nonetheless, though, Pitt gets a win to close out the regular season, now 6-5 on the year. For Alan Saunders at PSN and for Pittsburgh Sports Live, I'm Mike Asti. And yes, it could have been better, Pitt fans, but it also could have been so much worse. So you at least have that.